12 years, I think it was, after qualifying, before I went back to midwifery.
Okay. Am I allowed to ask you why you deregistered?
This time, yeah, lots and lots and lots of reasons. So the biggest reason, I guess, ultimately was that there was no insurance for interpartum care, which meant I could care for my clients antenatally and postnatally, and then I'd have to abandon them during birth, and have an NHS midwife, or they could free birth. And, people need me most at birth, and yet I wasn't allowed to attend any birth, even in hospital, without insurance. And we couldn't get insurance.
That's been a recent development, hasn't it? Because independent midwifery was a viable, insurance-covered, viable profession until relatively recently. I mean, I've had all my births via independent midwives.
Yeah, so I became independent in 2005, and we didn't have insurance then. And families were quite happy to be cared for without insurance, because they knew that if I did anything wrong, the buck stopped with me and they could sue me personally. And they were quite happy with that, knowing that I didn't have a big pot of money behind me, but knowing that I'd be less likely to want to make a mistake if they were going to sue me personally. And then in 2013, 2014, it became a legal requirement. So we got insurance. It didn't make birth any safer. It just means people, if they're lucky, if they manage to get through the court system, can have some sort of financial payout. It doesn't make birth safer. And then, I don't know, the NMC told us our product wasn't good enough a couple of times, and eventually they stopped it around. Now, I'm going to get a bit hazy here, because it was around the time that my sister was dying, so I really wasn't up on, what was happening and when. But around, I don't know, 2018, 19, I think they stopped us having insurance.
And that's all independent midwives?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So now you can pay for a private midwife, but not an independent midwife. So company...
The private midwife is, sorry, just to kind of understand because it's, it is a bit of a minefield, as you say. So the private midwife is insured by the NHS, therefore she has to follow the NHS protocols?
Not quite. So private midwives are a company, and as a company they can buy insurance. Independent midwives were individuals, and as individuals we can't buy insurance.
Right.
So I could work for, if I went back on the register, for private midwives, but they have similar protocols to the NHS, and it's seeming more and more so.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because I do know a couple of private midwives, and they've and they are struggling. They're struggling with ever tightening restrictions.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there's so much difference.
Yeah, and the good thing about being independent and not employed by a company was you just had to do what was right by your client, and of course the NMC and the nice guidelines. But as long as you didn't do anything too wacky, you could do what you liked.
So I know this personally through my own experience, but from your experience as a midwife and then independent midwife, what's the, from the user perspective, from the mother, who's then looking for a midwife who's going to midwife her through her pregnancy and birth, what's the difference? What's she going to get with the independent midwife who's, if you like, outside the system, versus the midwife within the system?
I think it's all to do with continuity of care, as well as being able to choose the person that's right for you. So people would often interview me and interview all the other independent midwives in the area. They didn't just want to know that one person would care for them throughout. They'd want to choose the right fit for them. And then it's all about building a relationship of trust with that continuity. And trust is everything, isn't it?
Everything.
Yeah.
But it's also, my experience, of course, as a VBAC was that the independent midwife helped me to navigate the system. Whereas, it's what doulas do as well. The independent midwife offered me so much more space and freedom to, to play with edges that are much more strictly defined within the maternity services than you find, outside of the maternity services.
Yeah. I think a good independent midwife or a good doula is really good at shape shifting. And what I mean is being really good at supporting the natural and being at home and keeping things peaceful, but also able to liaise with the NHS and with obstetricians and with the blood bank. And just to be able to put that professional hat on in a different way. To serve our clients. We're very mercurial, aren't we? Like Mercury.
And and it's also being, of course, in service to the woman or to your clients, as you say. Whereas within the system, there isn't that. You are in service ultimately to the system. You have to deliver the protocols that the hospital suggest. That's the case for the women, though, is it? They can disagree, but the midwives have to follow the law of the land. Yeah, the bottom line is who's paying your wages, isn't it? And it doesn't mean that if someone employed me as an independent midwife, I had to do as they said, because I don't. And my great colleague who passed away around the same time my sister did 3 years ago, she wrote a chapter in a book by Mavis Kirkham, who's a professor of midwifery. And Mary's book was about being a professional servant. And I know some of my colleagues actually take objection to being called a servant, whereas I don't, because I am there to serve, I'm there to provide a service. But where the professional part comes in is that if you say to me, actually, where I fancied giving birth is right next to the, I don't know, railway tracks or something, and my toddler might run onto the tracks, my professionalism would step in and say, no, there's a safety issue here. But and I can give people their money back, if I think they're if I think they're doing anything too wacky. I never have. I never have discharged a client, but I'm sure you never know. There might be one day. So what have you learnt? I suppose, what have you learnt about birth in your in your many years of service? Is what you've learned on the job, for example, the same as what you learnt in the books when you were studying to be a midwife? Not at all. So how's it changed? So I started my training in 1988, which is going to make me feel really, really old. But it was very much task orientated and very much, what was it called? Active management of labour we practiced. So everyone that came in had their waters broken at 3 centimetres. Oh, before that, everyone had a hot bath and an enema, or the other way around, an enema and then hot bath, I don't know. And then you could have your waters broken, and then you could have your drip put up to ensure that you dilated at 1 centimetre an hour. And that's what I learned about birth. That is what birth is. Every first time mum has to have an episiotomy. So I did episiotomies on all first time mums to prevent them getting a 3rd degree tear. Now this is a really interesting one, because we've come full circle on this now. But I believed what I was told in my training, although I didn't like doing it. Gave everyone an episiotomy, got really good at stitching, but I didn't like it. I don't know, it was just all too traumatic. I didn't like seeing people traumatized and doing horrible things to people. So I left, and at some point I got pregnant. I went back to nursing and I got pregnant, and I bought Spiritual Midwifery. I just saw it on a bookshelf and I thought,
oh, that looks nice. You know, I've got a hippie part of me. I'll have a look at that. Oh my God, it blew my mind. I thought, you know, I'd had this really medicalized training. I didn't know that people could enjoy giving birth, or that babies could be smiling from the moment of birth, or that people could really do it without doctors. I'd never seen a home birth. I didn't see a physiological third stage. There was none of that in my training. And I thought I was a bad midwife, not wanting to do all that medical stuff. So yeah, so that was the pivotal point, you know, Ina May Gaskin and spiritual midwifery. And then having my own children and having the embodied experience of, you know, your bad labour and your good labour and your cesarean and your VBAC and yeah, all of those things. So that was a huge learning. And then I went back into it. Yeah, didn't learn too much on my return to practice, but I went out to the farm in Tennessee to see why Ina May Gaskin was doing so well and the rest of us are doing not so well.
Yeah.
So yeah, spent 10 days out there, which was quite illuminating. The only thing I learned out there was that it's all to do with this positive feedback loop. So if the women go to the farm believing that everyone gives birth naturally there, and the midwives believe that everyone gives birth naturally, it's like, not that there's no fear, but it's a positive environment. People expect to have good birth experiences. And that's all it is. I can't see that they're doing anything fantastic that any other midwife doesn't do. You know, they haven't got a magic wand. You know, it's a few huts in the middle of nowhere, you know, little shacks of houses. Yeah, but they've got amazing statistics, and it is all that relationship.
Yes, but yes, it's so deep, isn't it? I mean, when that, as you say, when that positive, I remember attending a lecture with Ina May, and you know, and you know, her talking about the farm, and the statistics were incredible. For those of you that maybe don't know, the farm was a place in, where was it, Joy? In
Tennessee. Yeah.
And you know, American statistics are a lot worse than the UK, but on the farm it was a kind of, what was it, 90 high 90s vaginal birth rate.
Yeah, I think they had something like a 1% cesarean rate, something really, I don't know if it's in this book. Yeah, this was only up till 2010. Births completed at home, 94.7%.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. It's incredible compared to what we've got statistically speaking. It's the strongest evidence we've got that birth works.
Yeah,
physiological birth, to give it the time that it needs, have the trust around it that it needs, have the professionals around it that truly understand it. You know, and that's what you were saying, you know, the textbook midwife that graduated in the late 80s was another universe away from Ina May Gaskin.
Yeah.
And, you know, the deep wisdom and the deep knowledge and the deep trust. And then birth works. Yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately, it is the births I've attended that have informed my practice the most. You know, although, you know, you have to read research and you have to go to study days and all the rest of the malarkey, but I haven't learned as much as I've learned from the families, and I'm still learning. You know, every single birth, I'm sure you get it as well, Nadia, that you attend and you think, oh my goodness, I've never seen that before. Yeah.
So because I suppose for all the doulas attending as well, and the trainee doulas, you know, the majority, much as we all love and pray for home births all the time, you know, the majority of births do end up on the labour ward or in the, let's say, in the hospital, and they do because, you know, we come up against the obstacles in the road, and there are many different obstacles, from the first, you know, whether it's the size of your baby, your gestation dates, or any number of things that can occur within the birth. So I suppose, you know, the art of midwifery is in the navigation of those obstacles, you know, those normal obstacles in the road. So will you talk about the lessons that you've learned, you know, around some of those? Like, for example, you know, VBAC. I mean, you said were you a VBAC as well?
Yeah, my second son was a VBAC, yeah.
So what was your journey around, you know, that's the first obstacle is the scar. And I was reminded, you know, yesterday again, you know, in my pregnancy yoga group that's just gone, you know, three of them have had cesareans. So, you know, there are thousands of women walking around now with scars. So
yeah,
you're pregnant and you've got a scar, that's your first obstacle, isn't it?
yeah. And again, I think the biggest obstacle is the fear that you're met with by the care providers, isn't it? It's not the scar itself.
Yeah, you're right.
You've learned to live with the scar, and it hasn't caused you any problems, and it probably won't cause you problems in your pregnancy or your labour. But yeah, you have to be aware that it is scar tissue and that potentially there could be a problem. That's all we need to tell people. And that there are things that increase the risks of it being a problem, and there are things that decrease the risk. You know, if you're going into hospital for an induction with your scar, then, you know, that's increasing your risk of scar rupture, isn't it? But yeah, I don't, I don't, not that I don't see obstacles. I see people and families and women and circumstances, and I'm a great one. Tell me if I'm going completely off piece, Nadia, I'm sure you will. But I'm a great one for investigating what's going on for the person in the context of their life. So there may be a reason that they need a repeat cesarean and can't have a VBAC. I did support one of my clients who was left infertile after her first very necessary cesarean. She had to have IVF for the second. And I said, great, you know, I'm going to travel the 3 hours to be your midwife again. I'd moved out of the area because she was so lovely. You know, if you want to birth at home. And she said, no, I'm going to have a cesarean. And it was absolutely the right choice. Yeah. Sorry, I have gone off piece now, and I've probably avoided the question because I can't remember what it is.
No, I understand what you're saying, and of course it is always the bigger picture, and but I suppose more I meant, you know, that like the challenges for pregnant. I read somewhere that 85% of women want a physiological birth. 85% of pregnant women want a physiological birth. And of course, the reality of how many women actually get the physiological birth, even though they want it, is dramatically less. In other words, the definition of physiology, no external intervening at any stage of the process. So the journey of those women that have gone from wanting it to ending up with varying degrees of intervention, some of it wanted, perhaps some of it not wanted, is, you know, that is the journey of kind of modern birth, isn't it? It's the journey of all those women that want physiological birth that end up without it. And, you know, as well, for the women who are pregnant, but also for the birth workers who are supporting them, the doulas and the midwives, you know, it's how we navigate, and that's what I meant by the obstacles in the path, the bumps in the road, because most women, you know, most people experiencing birth will come up against some kind of, I mean, probably for you, it's all part of the birth process. But, you know, it seems that it's a reality that very, very few women will have a physiological birth without some kind of challenge along the way.
Yeah, I get you. So it's more to do with navigating the system and how to reduce risks, isn't it, of intervention, unnecessary intervention, and potential birth trauma, which is one of my real hot points. So a lot of it's to do with education, And I know people know about birth, and I know they've got access to the internet and things, but what they want to know is how to navigate the system. You know, they don't necessarily need the A&P of how a baby gets out. You know, most people can read a book, can't they? But it's how to get the best out of the system that people need to know, which is where doulas come in, isn't it? And where independent midwives used to come in.
Yeah. That's right, isn't it? Because if you if you put in something like, you know, overdue, post mature or something into Google, actually you'll get pages of nonsense.
Yeah.
Pages of really unhelpful material, and then somewhere on page 8 you'll get the midwife thinking blog.
Yes.
You'll get a diamond, but nobody will find it because, you know, you've got thousands of these vanilla, meaningless, you know, machines, you know, sending out pages and pages of trivial birth knowledge, just referring them back to the system. You know, whether it's, I don't know, any of the baby bounty people, all of these. But the real sources, the real diamonds, they are not up there on page 1 when you Google any of the challenges that are facing, you know, women in.
They're not, and I wonder why that is, because these people must know about search engine optimization, mustn't they?
because you know, because it's not mainstream, is it? You know, it is, but as you say, that's where the doulas and the yoga teachers and the community birth workers come into play. Only this morning I was just seeing on social media somebody put out, you know, ignore the due date, and, you know, lots of responses came back in saying, oh, you know, that's much easier said than done, because, you know, the pressure is immense. And you know, those are both true, aren't they? Definitely.
I find it really hard, you know, having the amount of experience I do, to actually go on social media and see the advice that people are giving with very little training and very little understanding. Now, I know there's a lot of really well-meaning people out there, you know, doulas, but I know doulas that have only been qualified a very short amount of time, seemingly giving advice to people. Now, our role as doulas and midwives, and I guess antenatal teachers and yoga teachers, isn't to give advice, isn't to say ignore the due date or you shouldn't go to hospital or anything like that. It's to give people information, but not advice. I just think that's ill-placed.
No, well, of course it is. You know, it is one of the golden rules, is inform, don't advise, isn't it? Inform, don't advise. I think that's what she was doing. She was informing, not advising. But, you know, I guess my message is, or my point is, that even though the information is there from the well-meaning alternative community, the mainstream message is so strong, and you know, the pressure behind it is so intense that the vulnerable new mothers, you know, they you know, it's David and Goliath, isn't it?
And I see people, you know, going like sheep and getting sucked into the system and churned up and spewed out the other end, with 30% of people reporting their birth as traumatic now. You know, it's horrendous, isn't it?
It is a travesty. I know that lots of people are here today to hear about the shamanic element of your work, and I know that you have spent a year in training with Jane Hardwick Collins. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. What drew you to her? And because, of course, she is a midwife, as like you, as well as a shaman. What drew you down that path? What attracted you to that path? And what did you learn along the way?
Right, this is a big one, and it's going to sound really daft. But I started collecting feathers. when you walk down the street and you see a feather and you think, oh, that's nice. And instead of just leaving it, I'd pick them up. And I ended up with loads and loads of feathers, and I didn't know why. And other things, bits of wool, bits of sheep's wool. And, I'm a bit of a womble anyway. I like to collect things and recycle things. And yeah, so I was doing all these things. And Jane came into my awareness. And I have no idea why. But yeah, she came into my awareness, and I felt a pull to go to a workshop she was doing. So I went to the workshop and I thought, yeah, that sounds good. And I didn't have much money at the time. I wasn't working very much. And my husband said that he would loan me the money. He'd give me the money and I could pay him back, which I never have, of course. I've been with him for 40 years. I know I can get away with stuff. I don't have to pay him back. So he paid for it. And I thought, oh, well, the universe is just sort of paving the way, isn't it? And Jane came over. I think we had 5 or 6 long weekends, plus her workshops that we had to attend as well. Because, of course, she lives in Australia. And it was quite an intensive, but also practical course. And what I loved about it was the very first time we met on the course, and people were asking her, are you a shaman? Do you call yourself a shaman? And she says, you can call me what you like. She says, we're all bloody shaman. We've all got the ability to heal. Our bodies heal themselves, and we can help other people heal. We're all bloody shaman. And I went, oh, actually, I like this woman, because there's nothing princessy about it at all. There's nothing. I live in Glastonbury, and the people that work at the Goddess Temple and do that sort of thing are absolutely wonderful. But there's like this I don't know, expectation of them to be priestessy and perfect, and and I think I expected a little bit of that from Jane. I think I thought, oh my goodness, and I'm not for. I can't be doing with anyone that puts on a pretense or a face. It's got to be really real for me, and it was so bloody real. And whenever anything happened, we'd sit in circle and we'd all talk about what had happened in our lives since the last gathering, and some awful things happened along the way for people. And she'd say, it's all a bloody setup. It's all a bloody setup. What she meant was, life puts these obstacles and challenges in our way so that we can get through them and grow and help others, maybe, like the VBAC. I'm really hot on VBAC now, and birth trauma, because I have that embodied feeling, and I need to help others. So what else can I tell you about the training? Lots of practical skills. So we learned to do drum journeys and what used to be called smudging. I don't think we can call it that now. We have to call it space clearing. And my training was called shamanic midwifery, but Jane got in trouble with the Australian Board of Midwives and had to call it shamanic womancraft. So, we made our own drums. And to me, what it means, what shamanic midwifery or shamanic womancraft means to me, is seeing the interconnectedness of it all. So being like grandmother spider sat on the web and feeling all the little vibrations. So when we were talking about interventions or hurdles or problems that people have, I think I've ceased to sort of see the problem, and I see more the situation and the ancestral realm and the spiritual things that are going on. They pull me much more now. I think that's how the training changed me. I don't see the nuts and bolts. I don't see the black and white so much.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I listened to a fantastic interview with her, actually, and she did talk about the debriefing of when you're looking back on the birth, and looking back, not just at the events, but at the the spiritual journey. What aspects of yourself, what shadows did you come up against within yourself? Which shadows do you face, or did you come up against, and did you run from them, or did you, how did you deal with them as they arose? And
there's this great sort of thread that runs through our lives, particularly through the red thread through the female line, of what happened to our ancestors. Because of course, we were inside our mums when they were inside their mums, and so on and so forth. But so whatever you have experienced as a female, or as someone who doesn't identify as female, got to include them as well, when you get to birth, because it's a rite of passage, it can all come up. So the point of pregnancy is that you have to do the work. You have to look at all the stuff that came before, so that you're not surprised on the day when something pops out and broadsides you, like I was. Because my first baby basically was a brow presentation, and was augmented and ended up in a cesarean. But looking back, I can see exactly why my baby didn't want to come out, and may have been looking around to see what the danger was. And, so it's sort of tying it all in. So you look at your own birth, and you look at your first rite of passage after that, which is your first bleed, and how that was welcomed. And then the next rite of passage is normally motherhood, and then we have menopause, and then we have death. So it is sort of tying it all in and seeing what you can learn from each phase that will inform the next phase. So I'm menopausal now. I haven't bled for a couple of years, and I think my menopause went really well, and I feel really good the other side of it. And I think I've got Jane to thank for most of that, actually. Just tying it all in and looking at the seasons and the cycles. So I'm in the autumn phase now. I'm not in the winter phase. I'm not crone yet, but I'm in this autumn phase, which she calls Marga, which means female magician.
And it's the power, isn't it? It's this is the time of power rising, and and the fruits of all of your work.
And there's power to be claimed by every birth. Even those ones where people feel that they didn't cope and they accepted stuff they didn't want. There is power to be claimed in every birth. And we did a huge exercise on the sacred wound.
Let's talk about that. That's very interesting.
So any wounding, particularly in our formative years, leaves a scar. It can leave just a sore place, and it can make us defend that place. And but if we have a look at it, if we have a real look at that sacred wound and aggrandize it, make it, actually look at it and see what we learned from it and how it's made us the person that we are today, it makes us stronger. So, very briefly, because my story's not that interesting, child abuse in my past, informed me that I had to look out into the world and sort of be defensive and things. But when I look at it, I realise it's given me huge superpowers. I've got huge skills at being super sensitive and reading people, and I've got huge skills of understanding what people need, and all sorts of things. And when you actually look at how it's informed your life, you can actually get the power from it. And it's the same with birth. So again, I had an unplanned cesarean, and I remember feeling my body was a failure, and it took me ages to get over the birth trauma. And what I tell people now is, not immediately, but if we can talk to people after they've just given birth and point out the bits of power that we saw or that we heard them talk about. So, you made the decision to go for the induction. That is a really empowered decision. There's power right there. Whether it was the wrong decision or the right decision, doesn't matter. They made that decision. That's a really good choice. They endured hours and hours and hours of labour. That's a powerful thing. That shows you how much you can endure. And whether you ended up with a cesarean or your lovely water birth, You know, you birthed your baby and you claimed your baby. It's the hero's story, isn't it? You know, the Joseph Campbell story. Look it up on YouTube. Joseph Campbell, I think it's called Finding Joe. And it's all about the archetypal story that is the only story there is. So whether it be Lord of the Rings or Little Red Riding Hood or our personal stories, there is just one story. So we get a call to go out. So let's say we're talking about pregnancy. So the call is, you know, call to have a baby. We go out and we meet the hurdles along the way, and we meet adversaries. We might meet someone who can be of use to us on that journey. We face the dragon or the orcs or whatever we meet on the way, NHS doctors, whatever, and we slay them or we get badly wounded by them. And then we return and we recover. And this is the hero's journey, and all of us can claim it. And we can encourage the women and people and families that we care for to claim that story. Jane says something like, we have the birth we need to have to teach us what we need to know on our soul's journey to wholeness. So if people have a shitty birth, you know, that will inform something later in their life. And I'm not saying that we need to say to people, you know, look on the bright side, you know, you had that unplanned cesarean, you ought to be grateful. Never, ever, ever say anything like that. But point out, you know, how much they endured and, you know, how strong they were, you know, in that really difficult journey. And yeah, people do very well after we do that.
I love everything you've just said, and I'm sure everyone else listening also loves. As you were talking, I think in visuals. So yeah. I was kind of, you know, I was seeing this whole visual cartoon happening of, you know, doctors being slayed, not particularly PC, so everyone, you know, as this woman goes on this hero's journey. But it's well, that is the spiritual dimension, isn't it? It's the journey, it's the deep journey of the mother. And for me, I very much am moved by and driven by, you know, this kind of the mother archetype, and, you know, the chemical mother archetype that arises, you know, the oxytocin matrix, the, you know, the fire of the birth. I mean, Dr. Rachel Reed goes into it beautifully in her book, and she's another Jane Hardwicke Collins graduate. And how, you know, through the fire of that hero's journey, that you know, the maiden becomes the mother. And I just for me, that just it says it all. And that is the birth education that we need to share. It speaks to every woman, doesn't it? And actually, I love what you said, particularly about the healing of the postnatal trauma, because that's really not happening. That finding the hero's story in, you know, in the birth that's been sabotaged or not, or perhaps chosen. Sabotage is the wrong word. It's not gone to plan.
But I believe, you know, even a birth that doesn't go to plan has gone to plan. You know, it's gone to the greater plan, which we don't know anything about. I'm sure it was my baby's plan to come through via cesarean, but they didn't let me know about it. Actually not getting into the role of making someone more of a victim than they already feel. So if they come out of this battle feeling battle scarred and beaten down, and we're there saying, oh, I'm so sorry, that's not going to help them back up, is it? You know, how would we greet warriors coming back from war with their scars? You know, we'd celebrate them. You made it through, and you've got your baby. And, you know, let's get on with the healing, and we can look at this later in the fullness of time. Straight after the birth isn't the time to go into all the whys and wherefores. I don't think people need that time of like shock to allow their systems to settle before they can actually face what happened again. So Yeah, I see it done in hospital, you know. Shall we go through the notes with you and let you know what happened? Women don't remember half of it afterwards. They're in shock.
But those notes are meaning that process is meaningless anyway. I mean, I did have a similar conversation about that with someone, and so one person did say, oh, the healthcare provider did accept responsibility for a bad decision, but essentially they're litigation protection. It's a litigation protection practice. You don't get reams upon reams of care workers saying, no, we shouldn't have done that, and we're sorry we did that.
No, and you also don't get an accurate reflection of what the woman felt or the person felt at the time.
Yeah.
You know, I've gone through loads and loads of notes with clients and people that aren't clients, and they tell me about their traumatic birth stories, and they've got their notes, they apply for their notes, and it will say coping well, you know, out to the toilet, taking sips of fluid, because we have to write something every 15 minutes. And when you haven't got a rapport with a woman or you're on a busy ward, you know, that's what you write. Coping well, taking sips of water, mobilizing. You know, there's nothing there. There's no clues there at all. It is much better to actually go by what the woman says. You know, that's far more accurate.
And I think you're right too, that it takes many weeks for birth to, you know, for the birth to be processed, maybe even more. I mean, I can remember processing my final birth. And as I processed my final birth, I processed all of them. I just, you know, you process the whole shabam, don't you, for about 6 weeks after, you know, I catch myself kind of going over it and remembering and having insights and, you know, making connections. And for about 6 weeks post that final birth.
Yeah, and it's such a big deal, isn't it? You know, my kids are 28 and 25 now, and I still reflect on those births. It's such a big deal in our lives.
Massive. As Ina May, you know, she says, it's something you remember for the rest of your life, however it is. Yeah. Joy, while we've got you, because I know that quite a few people listening to this today or wanting to listen to it, I just will answer. I noticed there's a couple of questions about the recording. Yes, I am recording it, and I hope that everyone is okay with that. It goes on the IGTV live, so and is going to be watched by many others afterwards, and I hope that everyone is happy with that. I should have stipulated that at the beginning. I'm sorry. For the pregnant community, but also for those supporting the pregnant community now, given that deep understanding of birth as you know, the woman's journey, the key life passage that it is, what is needed? What does the pregnant community need to do whilst pregnant to best ready the way for this journey, in your opinion and your experience?
Yeah, so there are the givens that we all know about, like resting and eating well, eliminating as many toxins as you can. But then there's the inner work. There's the looking at your shit, really. Because several themes tend to come up in pregnancy. Big ones around boundaries and family and safety are always coming up. I run a weekly pregnancy group, and, you know, however many years I've been doing it, we get the same themes, different people, same themes. You know, having problems with my mother, having to move out of my house, building an extension. What about visitors after birth? So it's a time to do the work with your family, as messy as it might be, if you can. And it really, it doesn't matter. I'm going to sound very glib, aren't I? It doesn't matter if that means separating from your family for a while. But you've just got to remove as many blocks as you can to your well-being. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is shutting people out of our lives for a short amount of time. yeah, look after your mental health, and that's got a variety of meanings. You know, everyone suffers down days, and everyone can suffer anxiety and depression, but it's like everything's amplified in pregnancy. You know, you're not just worrying about yourself, you're worrying about this baby you're carrying, yeah, what sort of world it's coming into. So we've really got to get mothers and non-binary people and trans people to learn how to calm their system down. And there are loads of ways to do this. You know, of course, yoga comes to mind. Yoga's always been one of my go-tos. But general exercise, or getting out, or just looking at things in your back garden. Yeah, I'm a great one for nature therapy. And this is really, really important, bringing our anxiety levels down, because of course, alongside everything else I'm doing my integrative baby therapy training. So I'm learning about pre and perinatal psychology and what the baby experiences in the womb. So our babies, of course, do get doses of our cortisol or oxytocin or whatever else we're producing. But I don't want any parent to ever think that's a really bad thing. It's not a really bad thing. So it prepares our babies to be resilient. So when we have bad days and we might cry all day, or, you know, we're worried about the state of the world, we don't know where we're going to live, we're going to be evicted, you know, our baby will get a dose of that, which will help prepare it for the world that it's coming into. It's not a bad thing. The point where it becomes a bad thing is if that is every day. You know, it's bad for the person carrying the baby as well as the baby. You know, it can affect babies in the longer term. So yeah, people do need to take care of their mental health. There are all sorts of aids online. I came across a really good one on the Tommy's website for mental health, and people can go on there and they get like a personalized mental health plan. Yeah, it's all free. They just put a few details in, and they can even get a call back from a midwife if they want to speak to a midwife. It's really good. Mind is another good website. But yeah, to me, it's all about, okay, so you've done your physical, you've done your eating and your exercise, and then your mental, and then your spiritual. So what I want to know from my clients is where do they go if they're in those awful situations? And I'm sure we've all been in awful situations where you put out a prayer, you know, and you don't have to know who you're calling out to, but you've got to have faith that there is something out there that we can put our trust in. Because when we get to that point in labour where we think we're going to die and the midwife's not in the room and our partner's asleep in the chair and we realise we're totally alone, you've got to have something to sort of hang your faith on. So it doesn't matter what it is. When I pray to the universe. I pray to whoever's listening. I pray to whatever saint pops into my head. You know, they don't have to have a well-established practice of anything. You know, universe will sustain us. The ancestors will come in and support us, whoever you're calling out to. But we need those conversations with people. We need to say, yeah, faith actually carries people through the worst bits, you know, and can make it better for a lot of people. Yeah. So yeah, they're the sort of main keystones, I'd say, as well as education. And what I mean by education is what's happening in your area, at your hospital at the moment. Sorry if I'm sounding awfully stuffy. I've got a dreadful cold at the minute.
That is great, Joy. That's great feedback, and to my mind, it's particularly great because I know it's the most important information, but it's also that nobody gets told that when you go to your midwife appointment at the local GP or at the local hospital. They don't say it's time to do your shadow work. It's time to look at your shit. Nor do they say you need to go home and think about boundaries. And you know, and that's it, isn't it? And it's and I also love what you say about asking that question, who are you going to call on in your hour of need? Because that is the determining, it is the essential difference, isn't it, between the purely physiological birth and the medicated pain relief birth, is that you are going to go like that hero into the heart of the labyrinth and have your darkest night of the soul, or whatever the expression is. And it's the death of ego, and it's at that point what's going to sustain you. And for me, in my final birth, it was my late mother, and I called on her in a very stuck situation, with the ambulance parked outside the door and pressure to go transfer into hospital, and a baby that was asynclitic and midwives that were despairing and exhausted. And I called on her, and she had 4, and this was my 4th, and I said, if you can do it, I can do it. And it was her face that lit me, lit my way. So I always tell my son that she put him on the bus to be born, because obviously their paths never crossed. So that really speaks to me, and I think it's such an important part of the journey, is the spiritual dimension. And it doesn't need to be, as you say, you don't need to be deeply religious. You don't need to be burning incense and in constant meditation. Everybody, what you said it before, everybody has a shaman within them, and everybody has a spiritual dimension within them. And it's just, as birth workers, it's just opening the door to that aspect within all of us. Amazing. Let me just love your bus story, Nadia. Are there any questions? Because I know that we're kind of coming to time, and it is there's something here. Let's see what's saying from Mishi. Would you say that's what's missing from a lot of current antenatal education, is the deep inner work that would empower women to navigate the obstacles, even when they learn about natural birth, or, for example, the safety of home birth? Where do they find the strength to go against medical advice and trust their deep instinct? That's the big question, isn't it? What do pregnant women, where do pregnant women and where do birth workers find that's everything?
Yeah, which takes us back to boundaries, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if you do the work in pregnancy, about finding out where your boundaries are and saying no to people, and I don't want that, and no, actually this is the right way for me, and getting in touch with the intuition. If we can encourage people to get in touch with their intuitive side more, get off Google, because it's only going to frighten you. You're going to read some horrific stuff and see some awful pictures. Just don't do it. The really important thing is that people go with the first answer that comes up. So if a doctor says to them, I'm going to break your waters, if their body feels like an instant no, listen to the doctor, use the BRAIN acronym, ask all the questions. But then remember that gut feeling that you had. Our guts inform our brain, don't they? It's a gut feeling for a reason. So people need to tune into that. So if we can encourage people to do that in pregnancy, look at their stuff, sort out their boundaries. And a really good one about what did you say? What did you call it? Taking responsibility. So taking responsibility. Loads of people now are free birthing, or they're having wild pregnancies. They're not engaging with the NHS. They're taking responsibility. Not that I'm going to say that's the best way forward, but it is a way of them taking responsibility.
I've got huge respect for and interest in the free birthing movement. Like you, I think it's ideal to have somebody a midwife with you in some capacity, definitely, but I do have huge respect for it for exactly that reason. It's the ultimate expression of female empowerment, and that taking responsibility, which is part of the maiden becoming mother. It's part of that growing up, isn't it?
Stepping into your power.
Yeah, finding your power. Yeah. Oh, we're at time. I knew there would be so much in the way of diamonds in this conversation, and I'm so grateful for your time. I suppose just the last question before we wrap it all up, for the birth workers and for those who are being supported, is in the midst of the journey, in the fire of the labor itself, from your experience, what is the best way in which we can support those women on their deeper hero's journey during the process itself?
Yeah, I mean, it probably sounds quite simplistic, but it's just listening to them and observing them, and having worked with them antenatally, knowing their story and knowing what might unfold. It's all to do with that continuity of care again, isn't it? Some of my clients now are choosing short packages with me, and I'm thinking, I wish they'd choose a long package, because then we really get down to it in the nitty gritty. And then in the birth, there's nothing really to be done or said. And I know a lot of my clients now, because I am getting older, just want me there. They don't want me to particularly do anything or say anything, or just the presence. And if we can become what's called the hollow bone. So you get to someone's house and you take a deep breath before you go in, or to the hospital, deep breath, and you think, right, I'm leaving all my shit at the door, and I'm calling on whoever to protect me while I'm in this environment, and to protect the mother and the baby. And then you go in, and then you don't have a thought in your head. I think that is the best thing we can do for our clients. Not a thought in your head. The hollow bone. She says, rub my back. You rub her back. She says, get me a drink. You get the drink. Just let spirit come through you. And sometimes you are guided to, touch her back or put a hand on her shoulder or whatever. I threw my arms around someone once. I'm not a touchy-feely person. Okay, I'm waiting for an assessment to see if I'm on the autistic spectrum. I really don't touch people. Don't really like them touching me too much. But this one particular birth, that it was a second baby, and the husband had run upstairs because the older child was waking up, and in that moment the baby started to come. So instead of being the midwife that I should have been, like down the action end, I ran behind her and threw my arms around her and gave her like a big old bear hug. And afterwards I said, that was a bit odd. I said, I don't normally do that. What do you think that was? And she thought it was her dead mother coming through. Propelled me to do what I don't normally do that. It worked for her anyway.
I love that image of the hollow bone. That's one I'm going to remember. Amazing. Joy, thank you so much for giving us your time today and your wisdom and experience. And if anyone wants to find out about Joy's pregnancy offerings, because you're doing it online, do you do some online stuff as well?
Yeah, I've got some courses online on Teachable. Of course, I don't know what it's called or anything, but they can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and there's Linktree, linked to all my stuff. I'm doing a talk for the ARM in a couple of weeks, the Association of Radical Midwives, and I'm only promoting it because I don't get any money from it. It's for the ARM, and they only charge $5 a time if you're not a member.
Okay.
So it's well worth it, on integrative baby therapy and birth from the baby's perspective.
Oh, wonderful. So what we'll do is, when I post this up on IGTV, I will link to that talk so that if anyone wants to follow through, I'm personally interested in it, we can book that, and I'll link through to your website as well. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, they can. Thank you so much, Joy, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone else who joined today.
Thanks for listening.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.